It is November 15th, 1796. Under a cold, heavy rain, the battlefield of Arcole stretches out, dark and silent, surrounded by the marshes of the Alpone River. Before it stands Napoleon Bonaparte, young and resolute, observing the Austrian defenses in the distance, aware that this battle may determine not only the fate of his campaign but that of the entire republic. Ahead, French troops march with heavy steps, sinking into the mud as enemy cannons lie in wait. The soldiers know the risk, but it is Napoleon's unwavering gaze that drives them forward. Today, there is no retreat, he says. As the first shots ring out, he seizes a flag and advances with his men. This is the beginning of the Battle of Arcole, a struggle that will test the courage, discipline, and endurance of every French soldier. A battle that will transform a general into a legend. Iron legacy where history lives. On a cold, cloudy morning of November 15, 1796, in the muddy fields south of Verona, Napoleon Bonaparte finds himself in a critical position. Amid continuous rain, the 27-year-old general, his face hardened and uniform soiled, knows that his army is on the brink of collapse. After months of daring victories, Napoleon now finds himself cornered. The Austrian forces, divided into two corps, are advancing from the north and the east. General Joseph Alvinczy, seasoned and determined, leads the main column of 24,000 men, while Paul Davidovich threatens Verona from the north. Alvinczy aims to break the siege of Mantua and liberate Marshal Dagobert Wurmser and his besieged garrison. The battlefield around Arcole is treacherous, swampy plains cut by the Alpone River and its tributaries, with narrow, muddy roads that have become traps for any swift troop movements. Visibility is low due to dense fog, and the cold water seeps into soldiers' boots, soaking them to the bone. Nevertheless, French morale does not waver, thanks to Napoleon's constant presence. He is always visible, moving among the ranks, giving orders and instilling confidence. Aware that the siege of Mantua is in jeopardy, Napoleon makes a bold decision: he will not retreat. Instead, he plans to cross the Adige River at Ronco, outflank Alvinczy's army, and attack the Arcole Bridge, severing Austrian supply lines and forcing a confrontation in the swampy terrain where Austrian numerical superiority would be less effective. Already on the night of November 14th, French engineers begin constructing makeshift bridges across the Adige, facing extreme difficulties under constant rain. By dawn on the 15th, the work is complete, and the first divisions begin crossing the river. Pierre Augereau, leading the first assault column, commands around 8,000 men along the elevated road toward the Arcole Bridge. His goal is to break through the defenses at the bridge and clear the way for a broader advance. Augereau, the general known for his bravery and aggressiveness, understands the near-impossible task before him. The banks of the Alpone River are defended by two Croatian battalions, supported by two strategically positioned artillery pieces. André Massena, with another 9,000 men, advances from the north, capturing the village of Porcil and dispersing small Austrian detachments in the region. His mission is to keep the enemy's flank occupied and prevent reinforcements from reaching the Arcole Bridge. As Augereau's troops approach the bridge, they face heavy fire from the Austrian positions, with musket balls and cannon shrapnel tearing through the air, forcing the French soldiers to crouch behind muddy embankments. The elevated road, which seemed the quickest path to the bridge, becomes a nightmare as the soldiers become easy targets for the defenders. As dawn breaks on November 15th, the thick fog slowly begins to lift, revealing the treacherous and muddy terrain around Arcole. Napoleon Bonaparte, accompanied by some of his closest officers, watches the initial advance of his troops. He understands the urgency of time and that the uncertainty of the terrain could thwart his plan. Augereau's division leads the attack, advancing along the elevated road toward the Arcole Bridge. His men march with difficulty, as the path is narrow and slippery. Soldiers tread ankle-deep in mud, holding their rifles high to keep them dry. The distant sight of the bridge brings both hope and apprehension. As they approach the bridge, the troops are met by an intense barrage of musket and cannon fire. Two well-positioned Croatian battalions launch a fierce defense. The elevated road, surrounded by swamps, leaves the French exposed, forcing many to throw themselves into the ditches to avoid the projectiles. The damned Croats, as Augereau would call them, are battle-hardened veterans who who skillfully used the river's natural defenses to their advantage. With every charge Augereau orders, the Austrian barrage remains relentless. The French troops attempt to regroup several times but are forced to retreat to safer positions. During one of the direct assault attempts, General Augereau, desperate to motivate his men, seizes a flag and rushes to the front of his column, shouting, "Come and claim your colors!" Even with this display of bravery, the French fail to cross the bridge due to intense fire and mounting casualties. Seeing his men struggling, Napoleon moves closer to the front lines. In a stern tone, he reminds the soldiers of the Battle of Lodi, where they had triumphed under similarly adverse conditions. He tries to personally lead a charge, waving another flag. The audacious gesture sparks a brief surge of courage among the French, but it is not enough to overcome the Austrians' fortified resistance. By midday, Austrian reinforcements, led by Major Matrowski, arrive at the Arcole Bridge, increasing the artillery presence and strengthening the defensive line. The French assault loses momentum, and Napoleon is forced to make a difficult decision. Retreat to Ronco. Napoleon decides to temporarily withdraw to Ronco, allowing his troops to regroup and prepare for another attempt the following day. He reassures his generals that the plan remains unchanged. Tomorrow, we will resume the offensive, more coordinated and stronger. As the French withdraw along the elevated road, many soldiers covered in mud and exhausted look to Napoleon, hoping his leadership will still guide them to a possible victory. The general, muddy but still imposing, is already planning the next maneuver. As dawn breaks on November 16th, darkness gives way to a battlefield once again shrouded in mist and a light rain. The terrain, a sea of mud, appears as bleak as the state of Napoleon's troops. Yet Bonaparte is far from surrendering. In his eyes there is something fiercer than mere stubbornness, a burning desire to change the course of this battle, whatever the cost. Just as the first light pierces the sky, Napoleon summons his generals for a lightning meeting in Ronco. Today, there is no retreat, he declares, his tone firm, almost as if he were speaking more to himself than to the others. Today, it's all or nothing. Those words echo among those present, each aware of the bitter defeat of the previous day. With a steady voice, Napoleon lays out his plan. Massena will attack from the northern flank, pushing on Porcel with renewed force, while Augereau will once again lead the direct assault on the Arcole Bridge. This time, however, there will be a crucial difference. Weil and his troops will attempt a surprise crossing south of the Alpone, where engineers have spent the night trying to stabilize an improvised passage. Bonaparte is no longer willing to rely on a single frontal attack. He intends to surround the enemy from all directions. Massena, at the head of his troops, marches forward with determined steps. "We're breaking that cursed line or dying trying," he shouts to his men. The French soldiers, knee-deep in mud, respond with an almost primal battle cry. The assault is brutal, and for a moment it seems as though the Austrian trenches are on the verge of collapse. But on the Austrian side, General Cervera is no less resolute. He swiftly sends reinforcements to hold back the French advance. The fight devolves into a chaotic clash of bayonets, shouts, and point-blank gunfire, with the French gaining ground only gradually. Meanwhile, Weil and his troops are battling the icy waters of the Alpone. The riverbanks are slick and treacherous, and many men are swept away by the current before they even reach the opposite shore. "Go, go," Weil yells, aware that failure here would mean more than just a tactical setback. It would be a crushing blow to French morale. Finally, a group manages to reach the opposite bank, establishing a makeshift foothold under heavy Austrian fire. The advance is slow and painful, but it offers a glimmer of hope on this grim morning. As Napoleon watches from a vantage point, the enemy appears more resilient than ever. Alvinczy, determined not to yield ground, counterattacks with unexpected vigor. "Retreat is not an option," he shouts to his men, sending more troops to reinforce the bridge defenses. The Croatian battalions continue to rain relentless fire on the French positions, and the situation becomes increasingly dire. Frustrated, Napoleon moves up to the front lines once again. "Hold your positions," he yells, a mixture of desperation and fury in his voice. It is a moment of all or nothing. As bullets whistle around him, he realizes that his men are reaching their physical and mental limits. Yet the pressure must continue. As nightfall approaches, it becomes clear that the French will not take the bridge today. Napoleon's orders are to withdraw temporarily and prepare for a renewed attack in the morning. The retreat is bitter but is not seen as a sign of defeat. It is simply another step in a battle that is far from over. "Tomorrow, we'll finish this," Napoleon tells his generals, his eyes still burning with determination. As the French slowly withdraw across the flooded terrain, Napoleon stands silent for a moment. The battle is far from decided, but he feels that one final effort could change everything. He is unwilling to abandon the field. The third day will be decisive. The dawn of November 17 is different. The darkness seems heavier, the mist colder, and the field more tense. After 2 days of grueling combat, physical and mental exhaustion grips the French soldiers, but Napoleon's gaze reveals only one thing: resolve. Today, he will risk everything. Failure here would not simply mean defeat, it would spell the collapse of the entire Italian campaign. Around a small fire in Ronco, the French generals fix their eyes on Napoleon. He rises slowly, his boots still covered in the dried mud from previous days. "Today, gentlemen, we will win or die trying," he declares, his voice a mix of confidence and urgency. "This is the final effort. Massena, Augureau, go with everything you have." Massena nods with a hardened expression. He knows the mission is more than difficult. Augureau grins, more determined than ever. "This time, there will be no retreat," he mutters to himself, recalling the frustrated attempts to cross the bridge in the previous days. As the fog begins to lift slowly, French engineers finalize an improvised crossing south of the Alpone, where Augereau will attempt a final flanking maneuver against Alvinczy's forces. Napoleon understands that this crossing will be difficult, but it's the only chance to catch the Austrians by surprise. "Gentlemen, there will be no easy victory today," Napoleon says, walking along the lines of soldiers. "But it is a necessary victory. The Republic depends on us." His voice is grave, yet inspiring. The soldiers, exhausted and drenched, nod in response, gripping their weapons more firmly. Massena leads the first advance. His men step forward with determined strides, bayonets fixed, shouting "Vive la République" as they charge toward the Arcole Bridge once more. The musket fire is immediate and fierce. Bullets slice through the air, splattering mud and felling soldiers around Massena. The Arcole Bridge becomes once more a whirlwind of gunfire and bayonets. Massena knows there can be no retreat this time. "Advance, you bastards!" he shouts, his voice almost drowned out by the thunder of gunfire. The pressure is relentless, but the advance is steady, every inch gained at the cost of blood and sweat. While Massena maintains pressure on the bridge, Augereau and his division attempt to cross the Alpone to the south. The waters are icy and treacherous, with soldiers struggling to keep their balance on the makeshift planks. Many slip, fall, and are swept away by the current, but the crossing continues. Augereau is in the midst of the crossing when a soldier near him is struck by a musket ball. "Keep going, don't stop," he shouts, raising his sword to rally his men. A battle cry rises, and more soldiers push forward to the other side, establishing a fragile foothold under constant fire. Seeing Augereau's crossing progressing, Napoleon recognizes the moment for one last effort on the Arcole Bridge. He turns to his nearest grenadiers. "Follow me, or stay here and die of shame," he yells, his voice fierce with intensity. With a tricolor flag in hand, he charges toward the bridge. The soldiers around him hesitate for a moment, stunned by their commander's bold action. But the effect is immediate. One by one, they begin to follow Napoleon. The bridge is a hellish scene of bullets and screams, but the French, inspired by their leader's example, advance with renewed strength. This is the critical moment. Bullets whistle past Napoleon, and the smoke is so thick that he can barely see the soldiers ahead. But his presence is a catalyst. With each step he takes on the bridge, French morale surges, and the Austrians, caught off guard, begin to retreat slowly. While Napoleon and Massena fight on the bridge, Augereau finally breaks through the Austrian lines to the south, forcing a desperate retreat by Alvinczy toward Villanova. "Retreat," Alvinczy shouts to his men, realizing he is being surrounded. The Austrians, exhausted and demoralized, begin a disorderly retreat as the French press in from all sides. It is the total collapse of the Austrian defenses. By evening, the French finally secure the bridge in the village of Arcole. Napoleon, covered in mud and blood, stands for a moment in the middle of the bridge, surveying the now empty field. He exhales deeply, knowing that this victory was harder fought than most, but perhaps all the more essential in cementing his legend. The Battle of Arcole has ended, a victory won at the cost of blood, sweat, and an unyielding desire to win. For Napoleon, it was not merely a battle won, but a lesson in perseverance that he would carry throughout his campaign. The battlefield is quiet, save for the sound of heavy footsteps and distant shouts of victory. The bridge at Arcole, taken after 3 days of intense fighting, now stands as a symbol of French tenacity and, even more, of the legend beginning to form around Napoleon Bonaparte. He walks slowly, observing the outcome of his victory. His eyes, fixed on the details around him, reflect a mixture of exhaustion and pride. The Battle of Arcole was not merely a military conquest. It was a testament to the relentless spirit Napoleon carried with him. He showed that, with determination and strategy, even the toughest obstacles could be overcome. But this victory came at a steep cost. The field of Arcole became a landmark for the French army and a warning to adversaries across Europe. The defeat at Arcole forces Alvinczy to retreat to Villanova, his troops disorganized and morally shattered. The siege of Mantua remains intact, isolating the Austrian garrison and depriving it of any chance of reinforcements. Napoleon knows that without this victory, Mantua would have been lost. But now, the city would become the next unshakable target for the French army. Meanwhile, across the fields surrounding Arcole, the French soldiers can finally rest. Many collapse beside their weapons, too exhausted even to celebrate. Yet the knowledge that they defeated the Austrians on hostile ground fills them with pride, and shouts of "Vive la République" echo across the field. For Napoleon, Arcole marks more than a victory. It is a lesson. He realizes that a combination of innovative tactics and a commitment to each soldier brought him the win. The Italian campaign continues, but now with renewed confidence. The bridge at Arcole and the village itself now symbolize French dominance over Italy. As evening falls, Napoleon gathers his generals in an improvised tent. Each of them understands that they are witnessing the dawn of a new era and knows that they are all being led by someone who would not yield under any circumstances. The image of Napoleon raising the tricolor flag in the center of the bridge, facing heavy fire, is quickly recounted by soldiers and civilians alike. In France, this audacious act becomes an almost instant legend. Soon, pamphlets and images depicting the hero of Arcole circulate, transforming Bonaparte into a symbol of courage and determination. Napoleon leverages this fame, aware that his name now echoes with newfound strength in Paris and beyond. In France, Arcole becomes a rallying cry, a reminder that the Republic, led by the young Bonaparte, could stand firm and triumph against all odds. For Napoleon, this was not just a victory, it was the foundation of his legend, the first spark of a fire that would soon ignite all of Europe. As he leaves the battlefield, Napoleon pauses one last time at the center of the bridge. He gazes at the river below, his mind filled with the events of the past 3 days. "This is only the first of many," he whispers to himself. He knows that from this moment forward, he is no longer just a commander. He is someone beginning to shape history itself. For the troops who follow him and the generals beside him, the Battle of Arcole is a reminder of their leader's intensity and dedication. For Napoleon, Arcole is a prelude, a first chapter in a career he knows will become legendary. With one final look at the now silent field, he turns and marches toward his next destination, his eyes fixed on the future he is determined to claim.